Good afternoon. We're going to start our webinar at about 10:02 or 10:03. So give us a few minutes as more people continue to log on. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Coronavirus Relief Fund Reporting Training Webinar. My name is Rod Taylor, the Division Administrator for the Community Engagement and Finance Division at the Michigan Department of Treasury, and our staff is helping arrange this webinar today for all of our attendees. Currently, we have almost 500 people attending the call. Thank you for joining us this morning on the Onkey reporting platform training. We hope that today's training will provide you with information necessary to complete the required financial reports with ease. We do understand that the requirements and provisions of the CARES Act programs have rolled out quickly and are hoping this webinar will answer your questions on your upcoming reporting requirements. While the focus of the call will be on how to use the Onkey reporting platform, we do have subject matter experts on the call for the grant programs. Because we have different state grant programs using the Onkey platform, this call today includes attendees from local units of governments, community colleges, universities, and the state of Michigan departments who all receive CARES Act money and are required to file the quarterly financial reports. Some of the questions asked today may not be applicable to your grant program. In a few minutes, we'll open the question and answer feature of Teams. This will allow you to message us during the webinar. We do ask that you hold off on your questions until the presenters have went through most of their slides, as many of your questions may be answered as they present. To access the Q&A feature, you should have a message box on the right side of your screen titled Live Event Q&A. Toward the bottom, there's a field to enter your question. Just above this box, you'll find a field to fill in your name. We do suggest that you fill in your name and organization, as it will make it easier for presenters to review and answer your questions. The organization name will be helpful so we know if your questions are coming from a city, village, township, university, college, or another state department. There will also be a question and answer period at the end of the webinar. We will go through some additional questions. Please note we may not be able to get to all questions today. If you have questions specific to a particular program, they will be best directed to the email addresses provided at the end of the webinar. This webinar will focus on what reporting and will focus on what to report and using the reporting tool. For your reference, if you like a copy of the PowerPoint, I will post it in the Q&A. For local units of governments on the call, a few comments specific to you. We are working on providing additional resources and training material to help you using the Onkey reporting platform that we'll be making available. We understand that this is new to everyone and we want to continue to help guide you through the process. If you're a local unit of government, please make sure you've submitted your grant opening certification form that was due on September 23rd. Also, if you're not going to use all of your grant dollars you were allocated, please complete the Treasury Return of Funds Form 5733. Both of these forms I will post in the Q&A. Again, these two links are for local units of government only. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Jennifer Edmonds and Mark Moeller from the Office of Accountability within the State Budget Office, and Elizabeth Barron, who is an Onkey subject matter expert from CGI. Jennifer will start us off by discussing the CRF reporting requirements for subrecipients. Jennifer?
Hi, thank you everybody for attending. We want to give you some background really quickly, as Rod already covered. This webinar is going to be largely about the Onkey reporting tool, the reason why we have to do it, or the reason why we're using it, and how to use that tool. Next slide. So a little background on CRF is all of you have certainly gotten grant documentation and that kind of thing that includes this information, but the CRF, or the Coronavirus Relief Funds, were issued as part of the CARES Act that was signed into the legislature back on March 27th of 2020. It afforded $150 billion in direct assistance to states and local governments. And of that, Michigan, as a state, received 3.08 to the state of Michigan directly, which we have then allocated pieces out through various programs and initiatives. The funds for CRF are required to be used for expenditures that are necessary, incurred due to the public health emergency. They also have to have not been accounted for in the budget that was most recently approved as of the date that the CARES Act went into law. And they have to be incurred during the period of March 1st to December 30th. Next slide, please. So this is a little information about the different types of reporting. So the way that the reporting works for the federal government is we report based on the type of award or relationship. So they've divided them into contracts, grants, loans, transfers, or direct payments. And then from there, any of those relationships where the amount awarded is greater than or equal to 50,000, they require additional detail and information to be submitted. Next slide, please. So the next slide here shows some of the memorandums that were issued by the Treasury Office of Inspector General. The Treasury for this program, because it's being rolled out so quickly, the guidance and the regulations are being issued in the form of memorandums and frequently asked questions. So that is where you can find the best guidance. That can be found out on the U.S. Department of Treasury Office of Inspector General's website, which you should have links to through your various grant documents and other information that's been provided by your agencies. So some of the key things that we have to report is the state of Michigan is considered the prime recipient for these funds, and we're required to report to the federal government through their grant solutions portal a number of key pieces of information, which include the amount of funds that were obligated, which means essentially awarded in the terms of grants and contracts. An obligation is the point where we've awarded that grant or contract. And then the amount of funds expended, which is based on the actual expenses being incurred, meaning the goods or services were delivered or received, and then associate those obligations and expenditures with projects and activities and the expense categories as dictated by the Treasury. So next slide, please. So this flow chart shows how the information is gathered for us to make those reportings to the U.S. Treasury through the grant solutions process. So we start off with needing to get information from subrecipients, especially for programs where funds were provided in advance. We need to have the subrecipients provide us the information as to the expenditures incurred related to those expenses, related to those programs. So we gather information from subrecipients, which may include school districts, local governments, local health departments, nonprofits, etc. That information is collected. It's also compiled along with internal information from our accounting records and grant management systems to get to a full, complete collection of all the information for all the over 140, I think, programs that we have now with the CRF funding. All of that information needs to be compiled and collected into an import tool. that's used by the U.S. Department of Treasury to import that information into the Grant Solutions portal. And that's a aspect of where the OnQ tool comes into play for us, is it helps facilitate that process of getting that information collected and organized into that tool in the format we'll need to transmit to the U.S. Treasury. Next slide, please. And here's probably the most important information for everyone on this call, other than how to use the actual tool, and this is the deadlines. So the federal reporting calendar, we got a bit of a reprieve in that we were able to obtain access to an import tool. Prior to that, we were going to have to manually enter all of this information into the Grant Solutions system. But wonderfully, we were granted access to this import tool. And with that import tool, because that will not be fully functional and available until 12/1, it buys us some additional time in this first reporting cycle. So what was originally cycles 1 and 2, which covered the quarters of 3/1 to 6/30 and 7/1 to 9/30, are now combined into one reporting cycle that will cover basically from inception to 9/30. That reporting cycle will be open for us to import starting on 12/1, and we have to have all of our information imported and validated by 12/15 of 2020 for that first cycle. With that in mind, we extended our reporting calendar to allow some additional time for subrecipients and agencies to gather information for quarter or fiscal year end closes related to 9/30. So the reporting tool for OnQ is going to be open starting October 19th, and we will ask that everybody have their reports submitted. All the subrecipients have the reports submitted by 10/28/2020. And then the agencies are going to be reviewing all of the subrecipient submissions and certifying that they appear to be accurate and complete, and getting that final certification to my office so that we can make that final upload to Treasury in time for that deadline. One note that I would like to make regarding this calendar and this time frame is I'd like you to note that cycle 3, which covers the period of October 1 to the end of the calendar year. That cycle is, they're going to make our Grant Solutions reporting tool from the Fed side is going to be available starting on Christmas Day. What a lovely opening date for us. But the end close date is the part that really I want to draw your attention to, and that is that we have to have all of that information submitted by January 11th of 2021. You'll note that's a very, very quick turnaround time from the 12/30 end of the period for spending all of the funds. So there will be a very, very tight turnaround time in submitting all that information for the subrecipients to submit it to the agencies, and the agencies to certify to submit to our office to get those into the federal government. So just know that that will be a tight turnaround when we get to that reporting cycle. Next slide, please. And then here is a slide that shows some of the reporting that is done. It's done by 2 categories within the OnQ system. So there is a reports greater than or equal to 50,000 and reports of less than or equal to 50,000. And those are based on the obligation. So you may have received a grant or even funding greater than 50,000, and maybe you've only spent a portion of that, but you still want to report in the greater than 50,000 if your total grant or contract award was greater than 50,000. And then the overall process is you will be able to get it, you'll get a registration email, you'll register to use OnQ for the first time, you'll go in, you'll create your quarterly expenditure report, including the necessary information, and then you'll submit that expenditure report so that it goes into the queue to be reviewed and certified by the agency. Next slide, please. This slide just shows the expenditure categories. These are dictated by the U.S. Department of Treasury. All expenditures for these programs for anyone that had greater than $50,000 of obligation, they will have to report their expenditures broken down by these categories. If you receive less than 50,000, you will not have to break down the expenditures into these categories, but over 50,000 will. For some of these programs, we certainly anticipate you may fall into more than one of these expenditure categories. You may have spent part of your funds on, for example, PPE or other activities that are within this list. So I would get very familiar with this list and start thinking about where your expenditures fall within that list to prepare for your expenditure reporting. Next slide, please. And then this is just some reminders on the expenditure reporting. Again, the over or under $50,000 threshold is based on the award or contract amount, regardless of how much you've expended or incurred during that period. And then also that expenditures are considered incurred when the services are rendered or the goods received. So if you order something but it hasn't been delivered yet, it's based on the goods received, for example. And that those have to be, services have to be rendered and goods have to be received by that 12/30/2020 deadline. And amounts advanced for those entities that received advanced funds, those are not considered expenditures for Treasury reporting. Those are considered obligations, and the total expenditures incurred will include amounts that are paid and amounts that maybe are not yet paid, as long as the services have been rendered or the goods received. Next slide, please. So why are we using Onkey? We're using Onkey as an online platform to allow for multiple subrecipients to be able to enter information simultaneously and to collect all of that information into a single reporting tool to facilitate the federal reporting requirements. The idea is that the Onkey tool will provide a much more user-friendly submission experience than the import tool that's being provided by the federal government. So that's why we're using Onkey to provide a more user-friendly way to collect information from a number of subrecipients. And that it also provides a vehicle for the agencies to be able to review the information submitted by the subrecipients and certify that that information appears to be true and accurate and complete, and that the subrecipients have been complying with the terms and conditions of the grant award. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of information, and we'll cover this in more detail in the demo, but this is some information we wanted to make sure you had on how the initial registration works. So you will receive an email from Sigma Gov Delivery that will provide you a link to the Onkey system. Within that system, when you first log in, you'll actually click on the Forgot Password button within that system, and that will automatically generate an email to you that will provide you, that will reset your password, and will also provide you your Sigma vendor ID, which will help you in being able to select your entity from the subrecipient list when you go to enter your expenditures. Next slide, please. And then finally, here is the part that everyone's probably really been waiting for, which is the Onkey demonstration. Within this demonstration, we're going to cover the registration of users, how to navigate through the Onkey tool, and in detail cover how to enter expenditure information within the greater than or equal to $50,000 certification reporting form, and within the expenditures less than $50,000 certification form, and how to do the entry of the information, certification, and finalizing those forms. And with that, I will turn it over to Elizabeth from CGI to actually do the demonstration. Unless there are any questions. I don't know if there's any questions that have come in that we should address before doing the demonstration here.
Jennifer, we'll just hold off the Q&A to the end, and then if our presenters want to be able to answer those questions in the box as they come in, that'll be appreciated.
Sounds great. Then I'll turn it over to Elizabeth to start the demonstration. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. I am demonstrating here from our test environment, so the URL that I'm using is not the one that you will be provided in your registration email. So just wanted to point that out. But when you do receive your email, and that email will be the email address that you provided on your application or another email that the state had requested from you. So you'll receive this email and it'll have the URL in it to take you to the homepage for the Onkey application. And on this page, you'll see there's a couple of links here. It says, first-time user will need to set a password. There's also a link, first-time users or forgot password. Either one of those links take you to the same screen. And you'll be taken to a screen and asked to enter your email address. And it's very important that you enter the email address for which you received the email with the URL. That email is what's validating that you've been set up to have access to the solution. So when you enter your email, you will then select Get Reset Password link, and another email will arrive at that same email address inbox. It will be from Do Not Reply CGI Notify. So if you don't receive the email within a reasonable amount of time, 10 minutes or so, you might want to check your spam account. I don't think that any of our users so far have had that be an issue, but if you don't receive the email in your regular inbox, check your spam. If you do have any issues logging in, you can contact the Sigma Financial Help Desk for additional information. And also on here, it just says that if you have any issues with the program itself, to contact your agency point of contact. So with that, we will go ahead and log into the solution here. And when you log in, again, when you get your reset password, you will still use that email address as your login ID. So when you log in, you'll be taken to a dashboard. On the left-hand side of the screen, you will see the two different types of reports that Jennifer mentioned that you will need to create one of. Either your expenditures greater than or equal to 50,000, or the expenditures less than 50,000. So to create a new report, which is what you would do for each of the reporting quarters that you're going to go out and create for, you would select the hyperlink here on the left-hand side of the screen, and we'll go through that in a moment. On the right-hand side of the screen are existing reports. So any report that you have created using that email address you logged in with, you'll have a history of here. So as you create your reports for the March through September reporting period, you'll see those. And when you come back in to create your October through December report, you'll be able to create those and have that log here. So you'll see the report, the date, and then the status, as well as a unique ID for each report in the system. So before we get into creating the report, I just wanted to go over a little bit about the statuses that we have here. When you start a report and create it, it will have a status of opened. And as long as the status is open, then you can make edits to it and you can change it. There's also an option to cancel the report. So if you create one in error and you just want to close it out, you can cancel it. And then the important status here is completed. And you'll see this when we get ready to create an actual report. There's a submit the report button. Once you've submitted the report, the status will go to completed, and you will no longer be able to make any changes to that report. And that status is the one that signifies that the agency reviewers can review your submission and certify it's accurate. Once they've reviewed it and certified it, then when you come in here, you will see that they've changed it to a status of approved. There is also a status of rejected. So if they do find an issue with the report, they'll change your report from completed to rejected, and then they will reach out to you for corrective actions. So with that, we will start by creating our greater than or equal to 50,000 report. You'll be prompted and asked, are you sure you want to? And you'll say yes. And then the screen will open, and you're going to have a very wizard questionnaire type format here to fill out your expenditures. So you have step 1, which is entering in your identification information. Then step 2 is actually entering the expenditure information. And then there's a certification step, and then you'll finish the report for submission. So the first thing that you're going to do is select the identification information for yourself. So the email that you get with the URL to Onkey and your forget password email will contain your vendor ID. And so that's what you'll need to use in this drop down here to type in and locate your, what we're calling subrecipient profile that's been preloaded into the system. So I'm going to enter a kind of a general one here and just put CB so that you can see the very first item here is your vendor ID. And if I entered in just a complete ID, then this drop down will be filtered to just my record. But you have some high-level identification information here to help you know that you're finding your right record. You have your vendor ID, your DUNS number, your name, your project number, and the project name. So we'll just create one, and then you'll see then the additional information about your contract or award that's been preloaded is then entered here. So you can further validate that you've selected the right record. So in this case, in addition to the project number and project name, we also have the award or contract number, whether it's an award or contract, the managing agency, the contract or award amount, and some other identification information, start and end dates and addresses. If you find that you have forgotten, or not forgotten, but selected the wrong item from the drop-down, you can then just come back and search again and select on a different set of items and validate then that those are the right ones. So once you have the correct profile, then you'll be asked to signify whether you are an actual subrecipient or if you're a representative from the state of Michigan that is submitting on behalf of a subrecipient. So in this case, we're going to just select the radio button that we're a subrecipient. And then we're able to move on to step 2. Now, I will point out up here there are save buttons. You can save as you transition from each step, or you can just transition and save at the end. Either way is fine. So on the expenditures page, the next thing that you're going to do is select your reporting period. And for data entry purposes, we have this limited to just this reporting cycle, which is 3/1 through 9/30. So you'll select your reporting period. I'll point out too that for required fields, as you're probably used to seeing on other portals, there's a red asterisk indicating the fields that are required. So the next set of fields are the expenditure categories. If you remember, Jennifer had a slide about that a few moments ago, and there was categories A through R. So you'll scroll through here to find the categories relevant for your expenditure reporting, and then you'll report your amounts for each of those relevant categories. So I'll just enter in a couple here. And then we'll go down to the bottom. I would like to point out that category R is the kind of catch-all category. It's for items that are not listed in categories A through Q. So if you select an amount for A through R, you're also then asked to provide a description of that expenditure since it didn't fit into one of the other categories. And then you're asked to provide the total expenditures that you've entered for categories A through R. So in this case, I think I entered $2,000. And you're also asked to enter the total amount received during the quarter from the state for this program. I'm going to intentionally leave this blank for a moment since it's a required field so that you can see what the error messages look like if you don't complete one. But we'll come back and fill this amount in here in a moment. So then the final step is the certification. And on this page, you are given some language here, and I won't read through all of this here in the demo, but essentially it's saying that you certify you have authority to enter this information and it is accurate to the best of your knowledge. And then you are required to select the certify button. And then you're asked to enter your name here. So you would enter your name as the person who has entered this information and certified it, and your position or title, and then your certification date, which would be the current date. And then you're asked to enter your email as the certifier who is entering this expenditure report, your email. And then a phone number.
If I could interject real quickly, because we've received a number of questions on this, I think it would be helpful for people to understand. A number of people have submitted questions asking if they were able to get a second account and that the person submitting the expenditure information may be different than the authorized official that was included on the application, especially as it relates to local governments. You will be able to have a different individual submit, and that's exactly the purpose of collecting this information here that Elizabeth is showing right now, is you will be able to log in using that email address as the registered email address login, working with that authorized official. And then when you go in and actually complete the certification, we want you to fill out your information so that, one, we know who was the actual individual who submitted that information, since a different email address may be used to access the system. And then also so that we have a contact email and phone number in case there are any issues or questions with that submission. So for those that have asked if a different person will be able to access the system to enter the expenditure information from the authorized official that was originally submitted in the application, the answer to that is yes. They can delegate that to somebody else, essentially by forwarding them that email with the login link.
And Jennifer, just one comment to our presenters that are answering questions. Make sure when you answer the question, you are publishing it and then answering the question in the publish field so that all of our attendees today can view those questions. If you enter it in a private reply, it only goes back to the person that asked the question. So if it is an answer that other people may have, please publish the question first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, for clarifying that. So once we have completed the certification information, then we will go to the final step, which is the finish report. And if you recall, on step 2, I intentionally left a required field blank so that you could see that when you get to finish report, if you have omitted something that is marked as a required field, you'll see a list of those fields here, and you'll be able to go back and complete that information. I'll also point out here, this is where the cancel report option is. So if you open a report and then decide that you want to cancel it for whatever reason, you go to the finish report and that will cancel the report for you. So we're going to go back to the expenditure step and just finish entering in the information here in that required field. And now when we go back to finish report, we'll also have that button here to actually complete and submit the report. So I'm going to finish the report and answer the question that yes, that is in fact what I want to do. And I'll be taken back to my dashboard. And now the report that we just created will be over here on the right-hand side of the screen with the date that it was created and the status of complete. I will point out we do have my screen size enlarged for demo purposes today. So the date fields and things are a little out of, they're bigger than they normally would be. So this is our completed greater than or equal to 50,000 report. We'll take a look also at the less than 50,000 report. There is less information needed for this report. It looks very similar to the other one. The only difference is in the expenditure step. So again, on the first step, you'll enter in your identification information, finding that preloaded subrecipient profile. Then you're going to enter your expenditures. The certification will be the same, and then you'll finish the report. So again, I'll come over here and I'll locate a subrecipient profile. I'll verify that the information in my profile is accurate and is in fact the profile that I'm trying to report against. Again, I'll select that I am a subrecipient. And then we'll go to the expenditures step. Again, similar to the other report, you choose your reporting period. And then the actual expenditure amount for the less than 50,000 report is just an aggregate of all of the expenditures. So you don't have to break them out into those categories A through R for less than 50,000. So in this case, I'm going to enter in my aggregate expenditure amount. Again, you have the same question, the total amount received during the quarter from the state for this program. And then again, we'll go to the certification. I'll choose to certify. I'll enter in my name. Title, again, the date. And we'll be able to now finish this report. And again, we'll see now that this report that I've completed is also under my existing reports with the status of completed. You will also, when you finish your report and it has a status of completed, a email PDF copy of the report will be emailed to your certified or email address. So not the one that you logged in with, but the actual person who is certifying the expenditure report will receive an email copy for their records of the report. And with that, that concludes our demo. So I will hand it back over to Jennifer. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. One thing I'd like to emphasize too for those that are filling out these reports is once that report has been submitted, you will not be able to go back in and edit anything, and neither will the agency. If there is an issue, that's a security measure in the system to ensure that information isn't changed improperly after it's been submitted. So if there is an issue with your submission, you'll actually have to resubmit a new report with the correct information. So and once you've submitted it and completed that report fully and hit that final submit button, you will not be able to go back in and re-edit. So just FYI to those, when you're filling it out, know that once you've hit that button, there is no sort of turning back. So, and if you have submitted it and figure out that you made an error, you will have to reach out to the agency to have the agency reject that submission in order for you to submit, and you'll be able to submit a new report, and you'll want to have the agency reject that old report that had the incorrect information. So just be really careful when you're getting to that final submission part and be real sure to save yourself some process there. So what we have here is kind of a recap of what we covered today, and we'll be getting to Q&A momentarily. But this reporting is required by the U.S. Treasury Office of Inspector General, and they dictate the form and the terms and what needs to be required and the amounts and different things like that. The first reporting period is going to cover from March 1 to September 30th. Or from the point that your grant agreement starts through September 30th. Not all of them obviously would have started March 1. The Onkey was selected as a vehicle for submission, largely to facilitate a high volume of expenditure reports from subrecipients in a way that would allow multiple users in a system at one time to collect and compile that information in an efficient manner. And the reporting to the state of Michigan in Onkey has to be completed by October 28th of 2020. This is necessary to allow us enough time to work through the certification of that information and testing, especially using this import tool for the very first time here with this first quarter's reporting. In addition to the training that you've received today, this training video will be available in approximately a week. You'll be able to review the recording of this session. And then additionally, there will be an Onkey user guide that will be provided to all users of the system to help with navigating as well. Next slide, please. So next steps. The next steps that we would suggest is to start looking now, if you haven't already, on preparing your expenditure information for putting into the Onkey reporting tool. Take an eye for understanding of what incurred means to make sure that you're reporting all incurred expenditures, which may include payables as of 9/30, as long as the goods have been received or the service is rendered. And then also looking at those different expenditure categories and making sure that your records that you're using to support that reporting will provide enough detail to tie to those different expenditure categories. And then you'll be able to obtain access to Onkey. That is scheduled to go live on October 19th of 2020. I think I saw a number of questions in the questions panel regarding when the email would go out with the link to that system. That email will go out with the link to the system on October 19th when the system goes live. So you'll receive that email on that date. And again, that email can be forwarded if the actual submission and completion of the expenditure reporting is being delegated to another individual within the entity. I know that was another question that was received. You'll enter expenditure data into the Onkey platform from October 19th to October 28th, and just make sure that all of that information is fully entered, reviewed, and certified before that deadline of October 28th. And certainly we recommend getting it in sooner than later in case you encounter any issues or need to recall a certification if you find that you've made an error, to allow yourself the time to do so. Next slide, please. And now we'll open it up for questions and answers.
Okay, there's a number of questions. I think we already covered who the users are. There was a question, can you have multiple users in Onkey portal?
Yes, in theory, you can have multiple users in the Onkey portal. They would all have to use the same email that was originally sent as the registered email for the system. That is going to be essentially the user ID regardless. And if that is delegated to another individual or individuals, they will just have to coordinate access to that system. And then ultimately it will be a single person that fills out that certification information at the very end saying that they're the person who is the authorized person or delegated person to submit that expenditure information, that the information submitted is true and accurate. So it will still be a single point of authority or responsibility as to ownership of that information that's submitted, but there is no preclusion in the system from having assistance in getting that information entered, just that information needs to be entered at the end as to who the responsible party is that submitted and is certifying that information.
Okay, then there's a question about are there specific qualifiers or exemptions under the administrative category expenditures? And there were some other questions regarding, is there going to be more detailed expenditure category descriptions provided?
Regarding the expenditure category descriptions, we are working on some additional information regarding those expenditure categories within the user guide. The Treasury, Department of Treasury, which is where those expenditures categories came from, the list that you saw is literally all they gave us. They gave us no additional guidance as to what those different expenditure categories are intended to mean. So we are developing our own guidance based on our understanding of those expenditure categories to try to help ensure a common understanding. As it relates to administrative expenses, the administrative expenses category is one where you would be able to put expenses that don't fall into direct programmatic expenditure categories that are truly admin. What I would remind people of, though, is with the Coronavirus Relief Fund program, indirect expenditures is not allowed for CRF. So your allocated expenditures based on an indirect cost rate do not apply here. So they would have to be direct administrative expenses related to the Coronavirus Relief Fund administration. So just FYI that it would be, those direct administrative expenses involved in that. I know I also saw a few questions as I skimmed through asking for local governments if this was only in relation to the CRLGG program or if it also was related to the other programs being administered by Treasury for local governments. The Onkey reporting tool is only being used to report expenditures for local governments for the CRLGG program because the other programs are more of a reimbursement basis, payroll expenditures where that information is already being collected as part of the application and approval process. So we're only asking local governments to report expenditures related to the CRLGG program through this OnQ tool at this time.
We did have a couple other emails or questions regarding the email address that the username will be sent to. If somebody's leaving soon, when will that email be coming out with the username and password? And then if somebody's already left and taken on that role, how do they get an update so that username and password goes to the correct person?
Yep. So I would recommend your best course of action is to contact the agency that's administering your program to let them know that you need to change your authorized representative contact information so that they have that information within their records, and they can also ensure that we have that information to change that, to sign up that new user into the OnQ registration system. And we'll be providing some contact information in another slide or two here after we're done with question and answers as well, that will provide some information on who to contact for different troubleshooting aspects.
Okay, another question that came in is when do we anticipate the cycle 3 reporting window to be open so they can plan?
So we are still working out the dates for the cycle 3 reporting window. In part, we are learning a lot right now as there's ever-changing guidance from U.S. Treasury. We only, in the last couple of weeks, received the final format of the import tool and made the final adjustments on our end. So we will be establishing that reporting deadline as we understand a little more fully the time that's involved in certifying those expenditures. All I can say is that it will be a very tight time frame, and I believe for local units of government, they have already published that they are going to be asking for expenditures to be reported starting on 12/31, I believe. But Eva, can you answer that question better? Because I don't recall the dates you guys posted on your website.
For cycle 3?
Yes, for cycle 3.
Yeah, I believe we wanted them due December 31st. You don't have to wait. I believe, like what you said, they're open up the system on the 25th. And then they can start entering them anytime after that. They don't have to wait till the 31st. But we need them on the 31st, so it gives us time to do what we need to do so that DTMB has time to report it to the federal government. So I know there's not a lot of time there, but everyone's sort of scrunched with time at that point, but feel free to get in the system as soon as it opens and get your stuff submitted.
Similar question on reporting. If you have expended all your expenditures in the first reporting period, do you need to continue to report for the additional periods?
No, if all of the expenditures were, if all of your expenditures were incurred before September 30th, then when you get to that 12/31 quarter, you will not be required to, we're not requiring you to submit just to submit that you didn't have any expenditures. And also, I think I saw a question from someone related to the confusion regarding the date of 12/31 versus 12/30. So I just wanted to make a quick reminder that these reportings are done on a quarterly basis. So technically they say 12/31. However, the CRF expenditure deadline is still 12/30. I couldn't tell you why it is they picked 12/30 versus 12/31, but that is still the expenditure deadline to have incurred all of your expenditures is still 12/30, but these are quarterly reporting, so technically they are as of 12/31. So that's why you'll see that little difference in dating there.
There's a question from a community college. Because we received all our funds in one lump sum, do we report that we received the funds in this reporting period regardless of the total expense?
Yes, that is a fantastic question. Yes, so for those entities, I know local governments and also community colleges for sure receive their funds in advance. That's exactly why we're using this reporting tool, is to be able to collect that information from those entities as to what's been incurred against those funds that they've received. And yes, you will report in that expenditure tab. There was that box that Elizabeth showed at the very bottom that says total funds received from the state of Michigan during the quarter. So for those entities that received their lump funding in this current quarter or the September 30th quarter, they will report the total amount in that box during the 9/30 quarter. They'll report the total amount received, even if they haven't expended it all. And then in the 12/30 quarter, assuming that there's no additional funding that's given out or anything like that, they would be reporting zero for the total funds received from the state of Michigan in that quarter, because they would not be receiving any additional funds from October 1 to 12/30, presuming that to be the case. So.
Okay, there's another question about entry that you enter the total expenditure amount. Is there any place that we need to upload supporting documents?
No, not at this time. We're not requiring any supporting documents. We do ask that entities keep that supporting documents and make sure that what they're submitting in the expenditure reports is adequately supported by your accounting and other document records. They may be requested on a sampling basis or in some other form or fashion for either monitoring by the state of Michigan or your own auditors doing your single audit, et cetera, et cetera. So we do ask that you keep that documentation, but there is no requirement to submit that as part of your expenditure reporting at this time.
I like to reemphasize that, many of our local units of government and other entities, because the dollars received from federal funds this year will be in excess of the single audit requirements. There will be that requirement, so you probably want to make sure that you're maintaining the documentation, both for your normal audit as well as if you have to do a single audit this year.
Yes, that's a great point, Rod, that for anybody, a single audit is required for any entity that receives federal funding in total that's in excess of $750,000. They would be required to have a single audit. So if your entity is one that maybe is normally just below that threshold, keep in mind that these fundings may end up having you have federal funding in excess of that $750,000 line, and therefore needing to have a single audit during the next period.
Okay, and here's a question, maybe it was already answered, I don't recall. Do we just report the expenditures up to the grant amount received or the total amount expensed for the reporting period?
So this depends on if you're a reimbursement. I guess the answer is a little bit dependent on if you're a reimbursement or advance. If you're in the advance group where you received a flat dollar amount, you would just need to show expenditures incurred up to that total amount of the grant award. Certainly, if you spend funds on CRF eligible expenditures beyond that point, as many of you may, those won't need to be reported because it's just matching against the actual grant award. For those that are receiving a reimbursement basis grant, which we do have some of those as well within the CRF program, for those, you would be submitting your total expenditures incurred, including funds that may not yet have been reimbursed by the state of Michigan. If you have a grant award, say for $1 million, and you've expended 500,000 of that, and so far the state has paid you 250,000, you would still report the $500,000 of expenses incurred, and then 250,000 as the amount that you've received from the state during that quarter. Just to flesh out that example.
For any of our communities that may have received funding for CARES Act dollars from their counties, so those counties that directly received funds, do they need to do any reporting under this program, or are they reporting up their county?
So any local governments who are receiving funding directly from U.S. Treasury through the CARES Act, we do have a handful of those in the state of Michigan. You are responsible for your own reporting through Grant Solutions, and so any expenditures related to that funding you received as a prime recipient, is what they refer to it, directly from U.S. Treasury, you will be required to be doing a similar thing to what the state of Michigan is doing to report our expenditures, in needing to access that federal Grant Solutions portal to report your expenditures related to those directly received funds. And you'll only be reporting through Onkey in relation to the expenditures that are affiliated with the funds you received from the state of Michigan's portion of the CRF funds.
So to clarify, if you are a city or a township in, for example, Kent or Wayne County, and received money from Kent or Wayne, you would be working directly with those counties on any reporting under those dollars received.
Correct.
Okay.
Also, I see a question that just came in regarding the 12/25 starting date for the cycle 3. We will actually likely have that reporting tool open prior to the 12/25. The 12/25 period is actually the date that the federal grant solution system will become open for me and for Mark in the Office of Accountability to be able to start entering or importing the quarterly reporting for that quarter into the grant solutions portal for the feds. So that is not the date that we're necessarily going to open the Onkey system. We will likely, with the idea in mind that Michigan Treasury would like to have all of those expenditures reported for the local governments by 12/31 to allow them time to review and certify and get that submitted to us by our deadline. We will likely make the Onkey tool available sooner than that. But just keep in mind that you will have to be including your expenditures through that 12/30. So for many of you, you may have expended them long before the 12/30 deadline, but make sure that you're including them. If you're cutting close to that deadline, make sure you're including all those expenses incurred through 12/30.
We are getting close to our 11 o'clock deadline, but we still have quite a few more questions. So we're going to try to get through a few more questions and we'll run a little bit long here. Related to that, if is the award amount the total received or the difference between the regular CBTRS payment that would have been paid?
It is the total amount received. So the CRF funding is separate from the other revenue share funding that you normally would have received. These are two separate things. So you will be reporting the amount of CRF revenue you received for the local government program.
Okay. If we received $60,000, do you want only $60,000 in expenditures in that line, or do we put in actual expenditures, say $65,000?
You would just report the expenditures that you are that you use the funds received for. So if you received $60,000 in expenditures, you would only report $60,000 in expenditures in the system, even if your COVID response efforts went far beyond that in expenditures. And I would just, I guess in relation to that, I would just say to make sure that you have the documentation or your accounting records in such a way as to be able to tell or support what you reported. So if you received 60,000, but you spent 100,000, make sure that it's clear in your documentation or your accounting records for in the event that you had an auditor that came to look at it, or Treasury asks you to provide support as part of their monitoring process, that you could actually isolate that 60,000 that was reported and how it was reported in the different expenditure categories.
Another email address question. How will we know that the email address the link will be sent to? So if somebody wanted to verify where the username and password will be being sent to, can they do that? Yep.
So for the local governments, this was the email address that was provided on your application for the CRLGG program. So hopefully you have a copy of that application that you maintained for your records. That would be the email address we're using for local governments. And for other subrecipients that are using the Onkey tool, there was a direct sort of solicitation from the state of Michigan to the prime contacts for those different entities to provide an email address as the lead email address to be registered for Onkey. So you'd need to work with probably your authorized official who would have signed that grant to find out what the email address was that they submitted.
I would like to add a little bit for the CRLGGs. If you did not submit an opening certification yet, we use the email address that you may have submitted with the first responder or the public safety program. If you did not apply under those two programs, we then used your contact email for the City Village Township Revenue Sharing Program.
So for the first reporting period, we will put the full amount received for this quarter. Then the next reporting period will have a 0 in that line.
Correct, presuming no additional funding is provided during that quarter.
Now, is that the true thing? I thought we're looking at expenditures, not the revenue.
Well, so there's two questions. So the vast majority of the reporting is about expenditures, but there's an additional question at the very bottom of the expenditure reporting form that asks the subrecipient to confirm the total amount of money they've received from the state of Michigan. This is both to confirm our records and to use as an additional validation check of the funding that we believe we've provided to the different subrecipients and grantees, and to make sure that they have the same number in their records and we're matching up there. And it's also for those subrecipients who are receiving on a reimbursement basis. That number will be changing for them as they get reimbursed funds. And so we want to be able to use that. It's sort of a validation and reconciliation tool within the system. So they'll be reporting expenditures, providing a total of expenditures incurred, and then just below that is a box that they'll fill in confirming the amount of funds they've actually received from the state of Michigan during that quarter.
If we received an item by 9:30, but the bill date is 10/7, should we report that in 9:30 or 12/31?
You can include that in 9:30. Because the item was received, that meets the qualifications to be an expense incurred. We recognize that with billing delays and things like that, there could be some gap where an expenditure maybe isn't captured because the invoice hasn't been received. The U.S. Treasury's guidance has generally been to use best efforts. So to the extent that you're able to know and document those expenditures incurred, we want you to capture that. But certainly we understand if an invoice is received, say, end of October, and you've already submitted your report, we understand that may need to be captured in the subsequent quarter.
There is a question here about will Q&A be available online? Again, in the next slide, we will show a link to the location which the webinar will be made available. That will take us probably 5 days before that will be made available, but you will be able to listen to the presentation again.
Okay, another question: for budgeted personnel diverted to a substantially different use, will this require full-time and effort reporting or estimates of time allowable?
So my recommendation would be that you include real-time time and effort for those, unless they fall under the administrative presumption that was provided in the Treasury FAQs. For those of you that are familiar with the public health and public safety program, Treasury did provide guidance related to that, specifically stating that employees in certain roles can be, for administrative ease purposes, can be presumed to be substantially dedicated. But if, for example, you have an employee who normally works in one area and due to coronavirus relief or coronavirus related activities, they had to be reallocated to a different function to respond to the coronavirus pandemic, then you would want to have documentation to support that person's duties being substantially changed.
We have two questions here related to receiving funds, and I think this is focused on local units of government. One question is, how do you find out if you receive funds? And the other question is, how do we find out who's applied for funds? Again, for local units of government, this is related specifically just to the CLRGG program, which is the Coronavirus Relief Local Government Grants Program. And the only local units of government that would have received funding out of this program are local units of government that normally receive their statutory revenue sharing, or also referred to as CVTRS revenue sharing. So those are the only local units of government that would have received those funds. If you think you should have received those and you've not, I would send an email to the treas-cares@michigan.gov to find out what may have happened to any payments that you should have received.
I got two questions that are kind of interrelated. At what point do we submit detail of our expenditures, and do we need to submit documentation to support expenditures?
So if you are one of the entities that received an award, again, whether or not you have expenditures during that quarter for the $50,000 or not, if you received an award of greater than $50,000, you will have to report your expenditures incurred broken out by those expense categories, but we are not at this time requiring you to in any way submit or upload any supporting documentation for that. You should be maintaining that for your records in the event that it is requested, but it is not something that's being submitted as part of this reporting process.
Okay, so we're at 11:06 now, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next slides and wrap her down here.
Okay. So this is this last slide here, or this slide here is related to the contacts, as I referenced before when we were answering questions. The first number there that you'll see is for our Sigma help desk. Some of you are probably quite familiar with this already. This is where you would contact if you're having trouble, generally speaking, with logging into or accessing the system. That's where you would, so if you need your password reset or something like that, that would be where you would be contacting. The second listing there is our project management office related to the CRF funds. This is a good place to email more generalized questions related to how and what to report. You can submit those to, that's a resource you can submit those to. For questions that are specific for local governments, there's the Treasury email and phone number there. And then for colleges and universities and the folks at the Fair Food Network working through MDARD, those are your contact informations for your primary points of contacts within the related state agencies that are working with you on your grants, that you can contact them if you have any specific questions related to kind of programmatic questions related to what's an approved expenditure, what am I allowed to spend the funds on, things like that would go to those three contacts at the bottom there for those programs. Next slide. And then this last slide, I think this is the last slide. This is just reference material. So if you download, or I think you received in advance this presentation, these are live links in the actual presentation itself that you receive via email that you can click on, that it will take you to where this training session will be posted in about a week. And then after that, you see the links for the information from the U.S. Treasury Office of Inspector General, their reporting requirements, and their FAQs. There's a lot of really great information that can be really helpful in understanding the CRF funds and how they're to be used, available at those two links.
Okay, so we hope that we hope you found this information to be helpful. We will now be closing the webinar. Updates will be provided as more information is made available. Reminder that the Onkey reporting platform is scheduled to begin available on October 19th, and thank you for joining us today. Have a good day.